What is up, guys? Welcome to another episode of the Meaning Of Podcast. This is the podcast where we get into the deeper meaning of your favorite film directors. I am Ace.
This is RB3.
And we're going to be talking about Zack Snyder, what some people call our Lord and Savior, Zack Snyder.
Zack Snyder has a lot of fans. So
yeah, we are in anticipation for Justice League. We really want to talk about. For a guy who doesn't have a lot of movies, he's a very divisive filmmaker, to say the least. So I'm very much excited to get into that for sure. But first of all, I want to know how you're doing today, RB3. How you doing, man?
Hey, I'm doing great, man. I'm here. Made the trip. Train was a little behind, so things got a little out of whack. But I'm excited to do a Zack Snyder episode. How's your? You just ran a marathon, right?
I did. It was something. Let's not talk about that.
Okay.
In fact, let's jump into the comment section because we want to read your previous comments from last week's episode where we talked about MCU films. And MCU films are obviously very popular.
Right.
So I'm very curious to read these comments right now because you guys left a few on the YouTube section. And if you guys want to leave us a comment, make sure you do. We'll be reading them. Also on the Schmoville post as well. I make a post on Schmoville asking you guys what your thoughts and opinions are, and you can comment on that as well. But first, I'm going to start out with a comment from Mr. Danny Allen. Danny Allen Experience. He says, RLM said it best. Marvel Studios equals McDonald's at this point.
Wow.
RB3, your response?
I guess it is kind of like a fast food, I guess, of filmmaking, but I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. I enjoy McDonald's. And
I actually kind of feel like the commodity.
It's very insulting though. It's condescending to what Marvel is kind of doing.
I don't want to say this because it's gonna freak everyone out, but I feel like the commodization of McDonald's and it's more felt with like the new Lucasfilm. I think that's a little bit more, at least with products,
like sanitized, like
no. I just feel like Lucasfilm is they're just so concerned with products. You see what I'm saying?
Like making a toy,
like Star Wars lipstick, Star Wars this, Star Wars handbag,
right.
Star Wars clothes, Star Wars. Like, did you hear about the new Star Wars line? It's called Rat and what is it called?
Yeah. Isn't it like
Rag and Bone
21 or something like that?
No, it's called Rag and Bone. And it's a really cool, like, super trendy New York brand. I think it's New York. And it's called Rag and Bone, and it's really high end. But they made a Star Wars like version of their clothes, like a Star Wars section.
Okay, I didn't know
merchandise. Dude, I was like, that looks really cool. I'm gonna buy it. Guess what? Guess where the prices start? What? It's like $3,000.
Really?
For like a high end like Star Wars
costume.
And it's like I don't know. For me, it's like that kind of shows where they're going, but that's a whole different conversation. I disagree with you, Danny. I think the MCU movies can vary, especially with Thor Ragnarok, as I previously stated on this episode. Movie Ace says, Civil War is the most overrated movie of all time.
Wow.
So many glaring plot holes and a ridiculous story. Iron Man and Guardians Volume 1 are by far the best.
So Civil War, I mean, I enjoyed the movie.
Mm-hmm.
I think it had a lot to say.
There's surprisingly a lot of comments that didn't like Civil War.
Well, I think it's the hype factor. People going in were saying, I remember reading a lot of reviews and watching a lot of critics kind of saying, oh, this is the best MCU movie of all time. This is the best Marvel movie. Best action scene is the, airport sequence of all time. I thought that was, and I think people going into it had that high expectation level. So when you go in and see the movie that you were presented, of course you're going to be a little disappointed if you're going in thinking it's a 10 out of 10 best picture winner. You know what I mean? So
I do. And I do get what you mean. And that's a good point too. Dude. I feel like that airport scene is what everyone talked about, but that wasn't my favorite part of the movie at all. I thought if you take that out of the movie and just put in like another action scene, I think it works either way. I mean, it's cool. It's cool to see, but I feel like the story is what drives that movie more.
Yeah. And I think the dilemma that's presented, like the character decision and all that, I think that's what makes the movie so interesting to me as a viewer. And looking at it, I mean, of course, and it's also coming off the fact that it was coming after The Winter Soldier, which a lot of people do consider, even like non-comic book geeks consider that a great movie. Like, you know, it was even getting some Oscar push for it, I think, at one point. So
Was it really? Damn.
yeah,
That's
yeah.
breaking news to me.
Yeah,
Wow.
I think that was mostly Disney trying to push it for Oscars, right? But it wasn't like, you know, a lot of people saw it as
Sure.
a film that could transcend a lot of the superhero genre. And, you know, I know you didn't like, you know, Winter Soldier as much. So.
I liked it a
Yeah,
lot. I just
yeah.
it took me out of that.
The
took me
computer,
out.
yeah, the computers,
it
yeah,
really
yeah.
did.
Now, that's understandable, but yeah. So I think coming off of a great second movie,
That's what they were expecting.
Yes, what they're expecting, and of course, you having all of these characters in is going to disappoint some people.
Sure. Gunslinger 199 says, I have big problems with Age of Ultron, but I kind of miss Joss. The MCU is getting way too comedic right now, and Joss brings a good balance between the drama and comedy for me. I hope the Russo brothers deliver with Infinity War. Funny you say that, because I feel the exact opposite. I feel like Joss did it great in the first Avengers and really dropped the ball in Age of Ultron. I know you disagree with me, I think, but I feel like
I agree.
it just didn't work. The really high stakes of what was going on and the really quippy lines of a Joss Whedon script for Age of Ultron just didn't work. And I feel like now it allows a film director like a James Gunn and like a Taika Waititi to literally mold their own version of what an MCU film is. And I like that. Whether some people may say it's too comedic, but to me that's just a vision of a director. Whereas like Joss's vision got a little bit muddled with Age of Ultron. At least I feel personally. Nothing against Joss. I think obviously I'm a huge Buffy fan, but specifically with Age of Ultron, I just felt like, ooh, this is so much Joss on the screen that it doesn't have anything else.
No, I agree to a lot of what you're saying. I think there is, I think I said in the last episode too, but my problem with Age of Ultron was just that it looks like a dark movie, it's shot like a dark movie, but they play it as a comedy. I think if it would have had the same kind of bright, vibrant feel of the first Avengers, it would have worked a lot better, and they wouldn't have tried to play up this whole dark villain thing. And I think part of that's attributed to the marketing too. The trailers that came out made it look like this is the darkest MCU movie you're ever going to see.
Oh, yeah.
And when you watch the movie, it's not that. You get quippy James Spader. You get the same... It's pretty much almost a lot of the same beats as the first Avengers story-wise. But again, it's supposed to... They make it look and feel so dark that the light moments just don't work that well. But I think that when we're talking about the balance of the MCU, I think that's a little bit different. And, you know, the way Joss handled that and the first Avengers worked really well. But I think the direction that they're going in now is so different. I think they're almost kind of dividing the universes to some extent, where you have the Guardians and the Thors kind
Cosmic.
the cosmic having a more comedic angle, whereas the stuff on Earth is built up to a point to where it needs to be a little more high stakes, a little more dramatic, where the Russo brothers are playing in.
Sure.
And even the stuff on Earth being set, like the Spider-Man Homecoming still has comedic moments. A lot of the MCU movies that are set on Earth still have comedic moments, but there's a difference now. And I think the direction that Joss was going in was a little different than the way they want to go going forward.
It's so interesting that we're bringing up Joss now, and we have a Zack Snyder episode, knowing that Justice League is coming out this week. And it's one of those things, too, where it's like, it's such a weird meshing of the two that I'm still nervous that it might not work. To be completely honest, I'd rather see a full Zack Snyder Justice League movie.
I agree with
than
that.
to see a Zack Snyder meets Joss Whedon smash it together and hopefully it comes out good. Like, that to me just makes me super nervous. Let's do one more comment real quick. Mike Johnson says, this is the first meeting of podcasts I listen to. I really enjoy Ace and RB3 together. I will definitely be watching the previous 6 episodes. This made me want to create my own favorite MCU list. My top is Captain America Winter Soldier. Thank you, Mike Johnson. We appreciate you. Hopefully you enjoyed the previous episodes. Let us know what you thought. Winter Soldier. It's what everyone pretty much goes to.
Yeah, that was what a lot of people mentioned in the comments, I think, is their favorite. And I mean, you know, again, I think that's a movie that coming out the time that it came out meant a lot to a lot of people. Again, with the NSA stuff, we're the Patriot Act, we're caring more and more about issues of national security now more than ever. And that came out right at the peak of that. So
sure. All right, enough MCU, guys. Let's move on to what we're all here for. DCU, a.k.a. Zack Snyder, a.k.a. the one who's going to save us from these other superhero movies. Let's talk about Zack Snyder, man. He's obviously we're talking about him because of Justice League. He's a director who's very divisive for some weird reason. Because I'm interested to do this episode mainly to find out why he's so divisive. Because I think he's so fascinating in the sense of his divisiveness of how many people either really, really love him or really, really hate him, and then kind of make their own version of him to fit it. It's almost like I know it sounds weird, but it's almost like a religion where it's like, take these little pieces of the Zack Snyder Bible and you have this denomination, and then take these little pieces and you have that Zack Snyder denomination. He's just a weird, he creates a weird fandom around him, if that makes any sense.
Right.
But I really want to know, obviously, this is called the Meaning of Podcast. What is the meaning of Zack Snyder to you personally?
Well, I mean, to me, Zack Snyder represents a lot of different things, a lot of different angles. He came from a history of doing commercials, music videos, kind of the same way that we saw in previous directors like Edgar Wright and David Fincher.
Yeah.
But Zack Snyder, I believe he graduated from the same school as Michael Bay, like literally the same college. So they come from the same kind of brand of filmmaking, whereas I feel like Zack Snyder differs, though, is the way he presents his films, the way he his influences kind of step more to the forefront. He very much has a style that's desaturated colors, slow motion. He has a lot of influences, whether that be like Ridley Scott in terms of the palette that he works in, or Spielberg when it comes to like the way his camera moves, the way he kind of follows characters visually. And I think that what makes Zack Snyder so, I think he's a visionary filmmaker, first off. I think he's great at what he does. I think he's an efficient storyteller. And I think that, one of the reasons that he is so divisive is because he is so willing to put the subject matter to the forefront and make movies feel like movies. And I think there's not a lot of directors that do that these days.
What do you mean movies feel like movies?
Well, I believe to me, what he stands out as making a film to make you feel like you're watching him film. You know what I mean? He has, whether that be his slow motion techniques, whether that be his snap zooms or his action zooms, or, and when you're watching something like Man of Steel, it feels like, oh, this isn't like a clean cut like story that we're like following. This is a movie that if there was a Superman on Earth and somebody was trying to film him, make a documentary basically of that character, this is how it would kind of look like. And I think that's what makes it very, very interesting. I think he has a quote where he says he likes to immerse. He wants movies to feel like cinema because while immersing the audience into a story, because that way you could, it's like a level of transparency in his work. And I think that's what a lot of the great artists in general do. Whether that be Alan Moore, he had a similar quote about comic books. He wants comic books to feel like comic books. Whether that be, classic painters like Picasso or whatnot. A lot of what you see in great artists is that they want to transcend and have some sort of self-reflectiveness in their work. Sure. I think Zack Snyder brings that to the forefront a lot, and I think that's one of the most underrated qualities. To me. So
absolutely, yeah. I mean, Zack Snyder is a guy who he made his first feature film was following the step of a giant with Dawn of the Dead.
Oh, right. It's a remake of George A. Romero's classic.
That's absolutely, like, you imagine if someone says, hey, your first movie is going to be a follow-up to a classic movie that everyone loves.
Right.
And that's very much, has a lot to say. That's a big footsteps to follow. But it's funny because when you see the writing credits on that movie,
James Gunn
and George A. Romero.
Yeah.
So it's kind of crazy to see that they picked Zack Snyder to kind of show their vision of what Dawn of the Dead is. I want to hear your thoughts on this movie because it came out in, I think, 2004.
It's 2004, yeah.
And it very much was like, a new recreation of the original movie, which it doesn't really follow the original movie to a point.
None at all. Yeah,
it's mainly just set in a mall, which is the same thing as the original movie.
Exactly. Yeah, and I had watched the original kind of both as we did the horror episode a couple weeks ago, and knowing that we're going to do Zack Snyder, I wanted to go back and check up on the original. And the original had a lot of great social commentary in there. Mm-hmm. It was all about consumerism. It was all about, it was set in the mall. So their whole idea was that a lot of like these zombies are just mindless people who are here when they have nowhere else to go.
Sure.
So and you have a stronger focus on character in the original film as well. And of course you also have it's another trope of George A. Romero, have an African American leader, hero, and Peter. So for and Zack Snyder remaking it, he takes all of the social commentary out. He takes all of the
As far as consumerism.
So as far as consumerism, yeah. As far as
there's one comment in there, but I was trying to find it because I was like, where is it? Where is it? There's one comment where CJ, because I'm pretty sure you rewatched it. CJ says like, "Don't steal anything," but it's kind of it.
Yeah.
There's not really any other line that says, "Hey, you know, the world's ending, but you got to look pretty," or something like that.
Right,
But
right.
There was one little moment, but it's so vague that it doesn't really hit.
Yeah, yeah, it wasn't, and that wasn't what it was about, frankly. I mean, the first one was kind of a commentary on consumerism and mindless spending and whatnot, and whereas this film was just a straight up action horror movie, and I think this is the most different film that Zack Snyder's ever made too.
Yeah, it's kind of odd because I obviously I rewatched it as well, and
Yeah.
I felt like the thing that kind of took me out of it sometimes was the tone, because you felt like you just saw something serious and then some goofy song plays and then there's a montage of people. You know, did you remember that montage
Yeah,
scene?
yeah.
It made me feel like what's going on? What happened? Was this weird?
Right, right, and
like it's great. It's a great montage thing.
Yeah.
But it's odd. It kind of takes you out of it.
It's so weird that this and Shaun of the Dead came out in the same year.
Yes.
Where you could almost feel like if Dawn of the Dead had pushed it just a slightly
A
more
little more ridiculous, because
yeah.
it is kind of a ridiculous movie. Like there is some winking at the camera with characters like CJ, with Andy,
Right.
with like the shotgun, with like a bunch of different moments. It does have like with freaking Ty Burrell.
Yeah,
like
yeah.
he's winking at the camera the whole time.
Yeah.
His character's a giant wink.
Right.
But so there is some of that, but at the same time, it still draws back to like an original action horror, like you said.
Yeah.
But what do you think of the weird meshing of the tones?
I mean, I like it. I think it gives it a little bit of value to what we're seeing. It gives us, this is a movie that has so many characters that I think instead of trying to make you connect to every single character, it just gets you connected to the group,
Sure.
to the whole atmosphere of it. And when something comes up to disrupt the group, that's when you start to feel some real emotion
Sure.
in there. But to the comedic effect, yeah, I think that really works because you get a lot of moments of levity and what was that one scene where they were like shooting the zombies and where where Andy was shooting and Vin Rames, I forget his character's name, but he would like write like celebrities' names and just like hold it up, have them shoot.
Jay Leno, Rosie O'Donnell.
Yeah. So I thought
and as I watched that scene and being a fan of The Walking Dead, I think like Rick now, and I'm like, waste of ammo. You need that ammo. But then again, he's in a gun store, so I was like, all right, that's how they justify it, that he has unlimited ammo.
Right.
But yeah, that scene, that's a very interesting like odd scene too.
Yeah.
But I want to talk about the opening credits to this movie. We had a long conversation when we talked about David Fincher about opening credits and how that's so artistic and important, and I feel like it's really cool in films when they do it right. What do you think of this opening credit? So it's got basically a montage of the world ending in the zombie apocalypse, and it's got that song to me.
Johnny Cash.
Ooh.
Yeah.
What is it called? The man coming?
The man, I think, left or something. Yeah. The man's coming. Yeah.
And it's basically talking about the Book of Revelations.
Yeah.
Which is just talking about what's going to happen in the Book of
apocalypse,
the Four Horsemen, the apocalypse, the day God comes back, the rapture,
Revelation.
But it's in Johnny Cash's signature voice.
Yeah.
And Johnny Cash is one of the most ethereal vocalists ever. He can transport you to a feeling, to an emotion, to a place just by singing a few lines in his signature voice. And the fact that he's singing about the apocalypse while we see the apocalypse happening is so like, it like makes you feel so much already within 4 minutes of just the montage. What do you think of that opening?
I mean, that's the Zack Snyder, man. I mean, that's the music video kind of where it comes from. So he's able to evoke a lot of the emotion that song is bringing, coupled with the subject matter. And like the whole found footage, like news angle of it makes it feel real, like we're about to go into it. And of course, establishing that opening sequence with Sarah Polley's character. I can't remember her name.
I don't remember her name either.
Yeah, yeah. But having that whole
the horrifying scene of losing her family like in 5 minutes already.
Yeah, yeah, and she has to jump into action just like that.
Yeah.
So having that coupled with that opening credits is like you feel it on a global level, but also on a personal level.
Sure.
So it was like a nice 1-2 punch in that sense.
Yeah,
so,
for sure.
Yeah.
I want to talk about too. One of my favorite parts of zombie movies and zombie films and zombie shows, I talked about it when we talked about Shaun of the Dead, was the idea of leadership, right? It's anytime the zombie apocalypse happens, whether it's Rick Grimes, whether it's Shaun in Shaun of the Dead, there's like a leader that rises up and shows that he can take charge of a group. And this happens a lot in this movie, whether it be CJ in charge of the security guard, whether it be, I forget the homeboy's name. Dang it, I forget his name.
Which one?
The first white guy that we see.
Oh, I know what you're talking about. Yeah, I can't remember his name either, but he was like the loser kind of dude in the beginning.
Sure.
But then he kind of transforms into.
Yeah, and he kind of does that whole leadership thing.
Yeah, yeah.
Or whether it be freaking cop, police officer, shot cop.
Oh yeah, Vin Rhames.
Yes,
Yeah.
Vin Rhames, and
Yeah,
it's all these like meshing of leaderships of who should lead, how they should lead, where CJ is like very much like already in that like mindset of like don't trust anyone, shoot anyone who doesn't trust you, lock him up because people are going to turn vicious, that kind of mindset mentality. And then you have the other guy who's like, well, let's show mercy, let's see what happens. You know, what do you think of the whole leadership dynamic? Because I adore that stuff. I think it's so fascinating because it's so realistic. Humanity, no matter what happens, we're always going to turn to someone that we feel is alpha, who we feel we can trust. And that's like a leader.
Right.
So what do you think of that aspect in this film?
No, I agree completely. I mean, I think that's why we become invested in a lot of these people, because we see them develop into a form of leaders in their own individual ways. And even if they're not necessarily like charging the group or taking a stand, they all have a bit of individual growth to where, you know, we have moments with them. You know, every character has like their standout moment of being able to shine, being able to provide for somebody else, being able to help other people in the group. So, and you know, and having and building to a lead, like you said, there's also a point of having everybody build to one leader, and how you know, changing up and switching.
Yeah, absolutely. How they switch sides and how they evolve as a person through the whole apocalypse. The biggest example of that is when you first meet CJ, who's played by Michael Kelly, who plays Doug Stamper in House of Cards. I don't know if you knew that.
Yeah.
Who I love so much. I freaking love the
Oh
guy.
yeah, I didn't even
I saw it as soon as I rewatched it. I was like, that's Doug Stamper. That's the MVP right there. But I like him because he starts out as like the really, really big asshole, typical like you know, stereotypical like douchebag, redneck kind of dude who's like, oh, I don't care, I'm gonna do whatever I want. And it's like, you know, after being forced to work within a group, he becomes like low-key the MVP of the group at the end of the movie. I don't know if you remember the ending, but he's taking out zombies left and right. This homeboy is like there, dude. The fact that one of my favorite scenes when he throws the gas tank.
Yeah.
He's like, give me the gun.
Boom.
Yeah. And it just blows up. Like that guy right there. That's you need that on a zombie killing team. Yeah. So he kind of like assimilates with the group and eventually, spoiler alert, sacrifices himself for the group. And it kind of like I'm sacrificing myself because I gotta sacrifice myself kind of way. Did you notice that?
Well, I think
he's like, I'll stay behind, and I'm like, why though?
Yeah, you didn't have to. And I think that's literally the problem in every single Zack Snyder movie. I think actually that's a common theme that we see in every Zack Snyder movie: the plight of a hero, the need to sacrifice and self-sacrifice. Almost to the benign of some of his movies, to where, like you said, it almost feels like a character sacrificing himself for
sacrificing themselves.
Yeah, and I think we'll talk about that in later Zack Snyder movies too. But you know, I think that's also what's fascinating about his filmography too. The plight of the hero, what he has to endure in order to become a hero, and how does that, you know, reflect on his or hers machismo, their place in their society and their, you know, so and
how they can use their skills to further a cause or a group.
Right, exactly. And then we even see that carrying over into something like 300, right, which is a movie about, you know, one dude, Leonidas, who is forced to leave his family, forced to leave his village, to command this army to a seemingly impossible mission, and how his sacrifice and his endurance and his bearing has to leads to this fight, and how they're able to overcome.
Sure.
So again, that's a common theme that we see in a lot of
Zack
his
Snyder films. Yeah, for sure. One thing I want to say about this movie as well is it gives me the most realistic form, and we've seen this in The Walking Dead too, but it gives me the most realistic form of killing someone who you know is infected. That to me in this movie is done so well, where it's like if you're someone really close to you, a cousin, a brother, a friend, is infected, like they're bitten, right? So you know they're gonna turn, and you know there's no cure.
Yeah.
You gotta kill them, right?
Yeah.
They handle this so well with that, with the young girl and her dad.
Oh, yeah.
Because what you do is you take them in a room, you say your goodbyes, you say, hey, you talk to them, and you wait for them to basically pass.
Yeah.
Then once they come back, you kill them. And I was like, that's handled so well.
Yeah.
Like that's the way to do it, and that's so like humane. Because unlike in other zombie films or other zombie movies, it's some sort of dramatic, like they gotta kill their parents or they gotta kill their family. But this one is like, oh, you're infected. It's been good knowing you. I love you. Here's my will, whatever it is, and then say, goodbye and have someone shoot him or something.
R.I.P. to my man Luda though, man, and Andrea. Racially motivated killing of Luda. No, I'm kidding. But that guy, that's also their scenario, right? Like their baby becomes a zombie.
That to me, that scene is so. It takes me out of the movie. It just takes me out of the movie. It's just like baby zombie. And it's like
it
no,
freaks out, like,
no, and then you hear a gunshot, and I'm like, come on, that's whack. But that's a whole different conversation too. Having that couple be Russian and a black guy, Russian girl and a black dude, and then having the baby and the idea of pregnancy or bringing a baby into this world,
and that's funny where the original film had that whole. Like the original film actually kind of stopped and had a whole conversation about abortion, right? In the original Dawn of the Dead.
Sure.
And they kind of have to talk because the main character in that film is pregnant. And like our hero, Peter, is like, are you sure you don't want to abort it? All this kind of stuff. And that's really, that's kind of like almost progressive talk for something that was coming out in 1970s. Yeah, something like, 78. So, and... again, that's kind of the main difference between.
And I know this is handled very, very lightly in this movie, but there is an idea. There's not necessarily it's not telling you, but it's hinting at you of the idea of an Adam and Eve, a repopulation of the planet with the young homie and his girlfriend. Remember that?
Right.
There's the idea of like, oh, they're a couple. We got to keep them safe because they're going to repopulate the Earth when the Earth is all dead or whatever.
Yeah.
Because they end up coupling up and they end up kind of fighting for each other and looking for each other. And then as I'm watching the movie, I'm like, oh, I get it. They're supposed to represent like the idea of like love coming back in the zombie world and the idea of like future humanity being further down the line. Right.
And they even have that whole moment where like the TV evangelist is talking on TV.
Yeah.
I think even that's the same actor from the original Dawn of the Dead. But of course, like when in watching in the context of that, it's like, like of course in the real world there would be some sort of TV evangelist who was like, oh yeah, same-sex marriage is causing like all that stuff, so.
And he says the line, he's like, when there's no more dead when there's no more space in hell, the dead will walk the earth or something like that. I think that's the line he says, which is so dumb. But but it's
that's the tagline of the movie too.
It is. Yeah. But yeah, that's something that definitely plays a hand in this movie for sure. Last thing on this movie for me, what do you think about the ending?
To a lot of people,
ending, the final ending,
the whole like
everyone dies.
Yeah. Oh, that. Yeah. I don't care, man.
Did you not feel cheated in any way? Like we just followed this entire story for them to just die?
I think the ending,
the most like anticlimactic way ever.
It was the worst part. It was the worst part of the movie, definitely. And, and especially for something that built up to where they're going for so long and building that, like I said, the camaraderie, the weird tone that kind of helped you connect to these people.
Sure.
Just kind of cheaping it out like that was kind of weird. I didn't really know what they're going for. I didn't know if that was like a budget thing either. Like they just kind of ran out of money or something, or I don't know, because that wasn't the ending of the original Dawn of the Dead either. So I don't know. Like that was,
and
it was a little
you
puzzling.
can tell like the film like ends.
Yeah.
It's almost like a post-credit scene where we find out what happens. Because I
Yeah.
rewatched it and I was like, oh, that was the ending. And then it has like 10 seconds later, there's a post-credit scene of like found footage.
Yeah.
And it was like, everyone died. And I was like, that's weird. Why did we
Yeah.
have to see that? I don't know. It just took me out of the movie for sure. Any last word on Dawn of the Dead?
No, I think it's a really cool zombie flick, and I think it's the highest Rotten Tomatoes score for Zack Snyder.
I was gonna say, some people say this is Zack Snyder's best film. What do you say to that?
Well, I don't know. It's so different than the rest of his. Like, all of his films are so desaturated, where this is, like, the exact opposite. Like, everything is very colorful, very saturated, very overlit. Yeah. And, again, I think that's totally the exact opposite of what every other Zack Snyder movie is. So
absolutely, yeah. Speaking of that, I want to talk about every time someone mentions Zack Snyder and what he brings to a movie, they always go back to visuals.
Yeah.
This guy is a visual master. Visuals. He's very much known for this. He's his own personal crazy style of visuals, and I want to talk about that a little bit because I feel like that's what most people talk about when they talk about Zack Snyder, as far as positive aspects of him. Because I also want to give a major shout out to someone who gets very little credit considering how much Zack Snyder is mentioned, Larry Fong, his DP.
Oh, right.
Oh my God, this guy is a visual master. This guy is he's the one who shot 300, Watchmen, BVS, all these movies that are known for their crazy visual atmospheric feel of a movie that makes you feel like you're watching an actual graphic novel come to life.
Right.
Like a Watchmen or a 300, because that's a graphic novel too.
Right.
Larry Fong is Zack Snyder's DP, so basically he works with Zack Snyder in the vast majority of his films. Not all of his films, but the majority of his films are with Larry Fong. And their kind of partnership is kind of what makes the visual style of all their movies. But to me, Zack Snyder is still a visual master. I'm not saying he isn't. I'm just saying that partnership is what makes it good. Because Zack is still the guy in the freaking editing room.
Yeah,
and he's still cutting it all together, and he's still making sure that everything works. But what do you think of this partnership, and what do you think of the visual style of Zack Snyder?
Well, it's tough. It's tough with a director like Snyder, where so much of his movies are kind of built in the computer, right? Like a lot of very effects heavy, mostly shot on green screen or blue screen, or in the case of 300, actually shot on the red screen, which is weird. But yeah, it's a lot of what it's difficult, especially with something when it comes to DPs and credits and all that stuff. Like, do you specifically give credit to a director of photography or cinematographer when so much of the movie is CGI, when you have something like 300 where the whole like iconic falling off the cliff scene was really all green screen, but of course
that's a whole different conversation. But I personally feel I think if you sit down at a computer and you visually compose an image, then you should get credit, because it still is. It's different because it's not in camera, but it's still a visual representation of what you want to show.
Right. But what I'm saying is, a lot of times the DPs aren't there for post-production, right? Like a lot of times they just kind of shoot the movie, move on, and then they leave it to the task of color
that's another question
and
too.
Stuff like that.
If I had to put money on it, I would say he is. But I don't know. Obviously, we don't know.
But yeah, of course we don't know, and of course, bringing it back to Snyder, Snyder is of course in charge of all of those decisions, how the film is going to look, how it's going to. But you do make a great point of having somebody like Larry Fong who is consistent and working with Snyder and shooting his films and designing the look that we see in all of it, because when you watch a Zack Snyder movie, it's a Zack Snyder movie right from the get-go.
Yep.
And I think a big part of that is the way it's lit, the way its colors are kind of muted, kind of toned down, you know, and all of it to give the effect of a sense of realism, right? Almost to the effect that some shots almost look like monochromatic because it's like one kind of color that they're going for, but they want you to feel like this is a realistic portrayal of how this film, you know, make it, you know, how real it is, how real these stories are, how real these characters are. So kind of dissolve a little bit of the suspension of disbelief.
Sure.
So I think that's important when it comes to a relationship between a director and DP to establish that kind of look and style.
Sure,
So,
sure. Speaking of, go
I'm
ahead.
sorry, just one more thing, but if I'm not mistaken, Justice League is a different DP.
I think it is.
Yeah, so that, and you can clearly see in the trailers for the movie, it's a very different look.
Yeah, don't get me started. Again, I'm come on now. Never mind. I have my own thoughts. I understand that tragedy is what prompted this, but I feel like Warner Brothers is so concerned with competing with the MCU that they don't realize that what Snyder was developing could have been something that worked, considering Wonder Woman worked, and that's all Snyder. He's got writing credits on that. He's the one who casted Wonder Woman.
The slow motion.
He's the one who did the slow motion. Like, that's Snyder. Like, Patty Jenkins deserves the credit, absolutely. But that came from Snyder's brain. And I feel like trying to be like, well, let's do Snyder, but Joss Whedon at the same time. And it's like, no, let's not do it. I mean, obviously I haven't seen the movie yet, but I just feel like when it comes to a visionary director like a Whedon and a Snyder, mashing them together probably won't work for me, but that's a whole different conversation.
Right. Well, I also want to say too, like, I know there's a lot of people when this whole thing was announced with Whedon and Snyder and all that, you know, I think the most important thing is though that the tragedy is first
Absolutely,
and, you know,
and that's not. I'm not excusing that in any way.
No, of course, but
Absolutely.
I'm just saying for, you know, maybe some of the guys who wants to come in the comment sections for this or whatever, I don't care, but like, don't, you know, family is, you know, first and foremost. You know what I mean? And you ain't got to insult the guy. You know, he's going through a hard time, of course. So it's just, you know, it's an important thing. You know, kind of as a nerd community, we should be responsible for being accountable.
Yeah, my thoughts are towards Warner Brothers, not
right, of course.
Snyder.
Yeah, no, exactly.
It's actually the opposite. I'm saying that
But before the movie even started rolling cameras, they had these, you know, kind of presets for Snyder to make the stuff lighter.
I'm talking about. And the fact that they kind of this is me spitting. I'm just spitting what I feel, but I feel like they're taking advantage of a tragic situation with Snyder, where they're like, "Oh, he's off now. Okay, now let's try and recolor and redo this one." When in fact, it probably wasn't. They probably weren't going to be that extensive changes, but now they're taking advantage of the fact that Snyder is off with a tragic situation, and now they're just trying to redraw and all that. And I feel like that's so disgusting of Warner Brothers to do that. And obviously this is my personal opinion, and it's not based on anything. It's just based on my opinions. But I'm saying that I wish that this wasn't such a market based on, you know, competition, that instead of creating something good and original and fun, they create a copycat version of the MCU that it's not going to work.
Right. I mean, we could talk. We were probably going to talk about Batman v Superman and Man of Steel a little later. So
yeah,
you know, I have my thoughts on those, but I do think I think going into it is an interesting idea of having a Marvel Cinematic Universe that's a little lighter, whereas a DC universe that is a little darker, have a little more serious. I mean, we're going to talk. We're going to talk.
Do you
about
feel
it,
like that's the way it should have been?
To me, I like the direction that they're going, even though I didn't like the movies. Like, I didn't.
I agree.
Yeah.
I'm 100%. I mean, that's my thing too. It's like I am 100% agree. Everyone's like, they should make it lighter so people. No, they shouldn't. They should just keep doing what they're doing and keep trying.
I am very afraid that as we continue to go down the line, there's only going to be like light and funny comic book movies, and then we're going to go back to the Joe Schumacher Batman days. You know,
I don't know about that, but I do feel like I feel like having the DC movies be a little heavier and being a little darker, and having the MCU movies be a little lighter, a little funnier, perfect. That would have worked perfectly. I think they just be like you said, just because some movies didn't work doesn't mean the tone isn't. It was never the tone that was the issue. That was never the issue for me.
And we are gonna talk about it.
Before we do, let's jump to 300 because we're talking about visuals. 300 is known for its visuals, but like you said, it was mainly all green screen, right?
Yeah.
But 300 is a very interesting movie. I just rewatched this one last night. It's extremely over the top, extremely violent, extremely jarring. right? Because it takes you into Greek and Sparta and Persia and all this stuff that's real, and then it makes it. This is obviously based on the novel, the graphic novel, Frank Miller, which he does. I'm not giving credit to Snyder for this, but I'm saying that it takes those real, actual events and real stories and makes it into this ridiculous, crazy fantasy of what it was that back then, with creatures, with monsters, with just bizarre images that makes it feel it just makes it feel different than a period piece or a sword and sandals movie. This isn't that. It's not that. It's more of a comic book movie than it is a sword and sandals movie. But what are your genuine opinions on this movie?
No, I like this movie a lot, man.
This is what made Zack the guy we know today.
Oh, yeah.
This is what made him famous.
And, you know, it's his first comic book adaptation out of many that he gets into. And it's Frank Miller. And I remember reading a story where when he went in to make this movie, make the pitch for this movie, he actually took the graphic novel of Frank Miller and kind of animated it. And he actually, growing up, he wanted to do a career in animation until he saw the first Star Wars. And the first Star Wars movie, A New Hope, convinced him to go into filmmaking just in general. But, you know, having something, you know, taking the graphic novel, animating it to kind of convince the studio, like, hey, this is something that could be a great visual a good blockbuster, and you know, put some backing behind it, and it clearly worked. And bringing that distinct visual style of the comic book to the live action format worked really well. Of course, the film has some problems. You know, sometimes the pacing gets a little wonky.
Sure.
But like as an overall action movie, I mean, it's really fun and kind of one of the most influential action movies I'd probably say in the last 20 years.
I would agree.
Yeah, the style that kind of went implemented from this movie is almost unescapable. I feel like this and Jason Bourne are kind of the two main templates that we see in action movies now, where we see the time remapping, right? Like where it'll just speed up, slow down, speed up, slow down. We see the way they use like the snap zooms, like it'll just zoom in super fast and then back in and back out. A lot of the tropes that we see in modern action movies visually at least come from 300. And I think it just deserves props on that alone as being one of the first to do that. So
yeah, and I mean, obviously the action in this movie is crazy. The fight choreography to me is what stands out the most.
Yeah.
Obviously, because to me that's what stands out in the movie, because the way he captures fight choreography is beautiful.
Yeah.
It's so good. Obviously, my favorites are when King Leonidas goes 1-on-20 when he fights those guys. And he starts first. He does the spear, throws the spear, pulls out the shield, kills like 5 dudes with the shield. Then sword, and kills like that. To me is really good. But another one for me that doesn't get enough credit is Michael Fassbender's and his homeboy son. I don't know his name in the movie, but the son of the captain. Their duel battle. When they go back to back and they're taking out dudes, and they literally do a circle. It's so cool. They go back to back, kill, circle, back to back. It's so freaking well done, and it's all in camera, which is shocking, and it's all the actors doing it. It's Michael Fassbender doing it, because I was really paying attention to like the CG Stitch face that we see a lot, like in Kingsman, where they CG Stitch face a person on there. But this was like that. You could tell like that's Michael without a mask. And this, I got to give a shout out, obviously, to Michael Fassbender in this movie. He is so happy to be in this movie, dude.
Yeah, this is his breakout.
This was his breakout role, and you could tell he's so like freaking excited to be in this movie. Like obviously his character is very over the top and excited, but the actor himself, the way he commits to every action scene and he pulls it off so well, and the way he just does his crazy character, because he's the guy who says, you know, we'll fight in the shade, and he's the guy who has like a lot of funny lines, because some of the lines in this movie, dude, I think that's the standout of this movie as well, the action and the lines, because the lines in this movie are funny.
They're some all-time classics.
He's like, oh, our arrows will blot out the sun, and he's like, then we will fight in the shade. That's one. My favorite one is when the Persian guy with the whip, he cuts off his arm.
Yeah.
He says, my arm. And then Michael Fassbender looks down on him and he's like, it's not yours anymore. And I'm like, what? Obviously,
and this is Sparta, of course.
This is Sparta. Tonight We Dine in Hell. This movie is an instant classic, dude. It became an instant classic with lines that we all remember. And lines that we will never forget because of this freaking movie, you know, Earth and Water, or the Sparta kick. This is Sparta, and all that stuff is like really comes from here. And it really did make Zack Snyder from a mid-range director making $40 million movies to like blockbuster.
And I think that's part of his influence in the industry, right? People are referencing, you know, they kind of want this style. They want to see this style in their movies from now on, and even in TV shows. But I think more significantly, going back to the point of you talking about Fassbender doing all of the stunts and all of the fighting scenes, like that's a staple of Zack Snyder, to have his actors train for months and months and months to do all their own action. And you really see it in the film. Like, you get a real look at, you know, this is really Fassbender, or we'll see in Sucker Punch, this is really like Vanessa Hudgens, or like all of these different people, you know, having a real training background allows you to do a lot of stuff in camera. It allows you to do a lot of long takes. And, you know, of course, he adjusts maybe a lot of those takes in post-production. But you see like a lot of these really, really cool and fascinating moves and ways that you know, and I think that's also a bigger theme in Zack Snyder movies, is like the theme of machismo, masculinity.
We're gonna talk about that.
Yeah.
For sure.
So and again, I think that's really and I think 300 capitalizes off of having
it capitalizes that times 20.
Yeah,
it's crazy. But
with
Gerard Butler, obviously, and the thing to me that makes this movie work the most is to have a script like this, one, and then the kind of action choreography that you're going to get from this. Having that two combination, you can see that in any movie. But what makes it different to me is having the actors who are so freaking committed, obviously with their bodies, because they're working out like 20 million times a day or whatever. But like, they're so freaking committed to the point that you will have someone like a Michael Fassbender becoming a Spartan in the sense of how much training, and Gerard Butler becoming that character physically is what makes it work so well. That's what makes the action scenes work, is knowing that that is really King Leonidas, or that is really Michael Fassbender. That to me is what the formula that makes this movie work so well. Yeah, for sure. We're going to jump into that, but before we do, I really want to jump into Watchmen.
Oh, yes.
Because Watchmen, I want to use Watchmen as our gateway into a talk on a little bit of the political atmosphere around Zack Snyder, because for some reason, he has become a very political director. And whether that be certain political people putting that perspective on Zack, or whether that be Zack showing it in his movies, is still like, you know, what comes first, the chicken or the egg? I'm not sure. But I want to hear your perspective, specifically with this movie, as far as the political atmosphere and as far as politically what Zack was trying to say. And also your general thoughts on this movie, because I know you saw this one in theaters, right?
Right. Yeah, I think, well, actually, you know, this is the first episode we ever did where I've seen like all of his movies in theaters.
Yeah.
So this one, I remember watching this one. I was probably too young to be watching it, but I remember initially watching this film. It is kind of a transcendent superhero movie. This is really ahead of its time, honestly. I think it's kind of a masterpiece to me, because it really is a superhero movie about the tropes of superheroes and the conventions of superheroes, but how those can have some real downfalls and repercussions, and how in a realistic world this is how this would happen. You know, in a world where in a world where the United States goes off to war in Vietnam, but we have a Dr. Manhattan on our side, how that would prompt 8 re-elections of a Nixon, or how, you know, all of these different aspects of how this movie works is really fascinating, and has an interesting commentary on not just how superheroes work within their own facet, but how the rest of the world kind of reacts to idols and figures and you know, models of our behavior. And I think that's most apparent in the character of the comedian, who is somebody who loves violence, who loves attacking people, who breaks up riots, shooting rubber bullets into the crowd and punching people. And to him, that's the American way. That's what he sees America as. Whereas you have something like somebody like Night Owl, who's kind of just more of a straight up patriarch who wants to see the people be better and the world be better, but not necessarily attribute anything to that, and kind of feels repressed to somebody like the comedian who is so upright and aggressive. So
what's interesting about this movie too, and I kind of want to follow the way this movie does it, is that they break down each character one by one. Mm-hmm. You notice that?
Right.
Like they show you who's this person, who's that person, then it cuts to that person, then it cuts to that person, and each person gets their own like backstory kind of moment, like whether intro, it's Rorschach.
Yeah.
Dr. Manhattan,
the comedian with the opening sequence is
the comedian with the opening sequence.
Even though it's not his backstory, but you know immediately what that guy is and what he's capable of doing.
Let's talk about the comedian, because I think the comedian, you're right, he is one of the most interesting ones, because he's the most offensive character I've seen on screen. One of the most offensive. The fact that he shoots a pregnant woman.
Yeah.
The fact that he loves burning people. The fact that he rapes people.
Yeah.
The fact that he loves murdering. One of my favorite lines in the movie is when Night Owl was talking to Ozymandias, and he's like, the comedian died, or blah blah blah, and he's like, the comedian's a sociopath. He's crazy.
Yeah.
And he's like, and then he says one of my favorite lines too, because he says he's practically a Nazi. Mm-hmm. And as soon as he said that, I was like, he's practically a Nazi. The fact that this guy fights for Nixon and is like, he's Nixon's personal assassin. Like Nixon had his personal like bodyguard, personal like attack dog. Mm-hmm. That was the comedian. Mm-hmm. And the fact that Ozymandias called him a Nazi, I was like, whoa, that's interesting. Mm-hmm. Like the fact that he's so evil and so disgusting that even if he is American, he's still Nazi, and he's still that dark, racist, disgusting human being.
He encompasses everything wrong with America and the United States.
Sure.
Like everything that we kind of sweep under the rug or kind of push aside in our heroes. Mm-hmm. He kind of represents all of that. And a lot of times when we see our heroes now, we see, unfortunately, people like Bill Cosby, who's like a major rapist. Mm-hmm. We see a lot of our heroes now, at least in 2017, we're seeing a lot of that becoming exposed. But, back then, back in the days of, this is set in like the 70s, or just back in any other time in history, we just know like our leaders were just complete assholes, dicks, racists. Walt Disney was an anti-Semite. So like a lot of different aspects that we just kind of brush under the rug.
Sure.
The comedian represents a lot of that. So in him, when he dies, he kind of has like this tragic thing that kind of sparks and ignites the film. And I think that in a lot of ways is, kind of representing of what is also wrong with society, right? Like,
sure.
We're only ready to talk about how good or bad somebody was, post-death, and now that triggering of events leads to an ultimate catastrophic, event.
That's another thing too. I'm glad you brought that up. His funeral. Uh-huh. I was really, really paying attention to that, because I was paying attention to the fact that they honor him as like a U.S. hero.
Exactly. A soldier.
Like a soldier. Mm-hmm. Like a guy, like a Marine, a veteran, something you give honor to, right? Because normally that's what you should do. You give honor to veterans. But this guy, it felt different, right? Watching that scene, because you're like, he's a veteran, but he's also not a veteran.
Yeah.
He's also a crazy killer and a kind of terrible human being. So should he be honored that way because of the actions he took? Or should he be honored by the man of his own character? Mm-hmm. And if he was, would he really have that exuberance of a funeral, right?
Right.
Because it's one of those things where you honor the man that he was, not the man that he became, I guess you could say. Yeah. But even then, it's like, I don't know. It's one of those things where is the line of good and evil? Does it become... It becomes what country you're a part of, right? Because if you're American, then it's good. And if you're not American, then it's bad.
Right.
That to me was mainly the part of the comedian. And obviously Jeffrey Dean Morgan as well.
Oh, so good. I
Yeah.
mean, man,
I
that
love
was
Jeffrey
like
Dean
his
Morgan.
breakout. That was his breakout performance too. Really.
I know him from Supernatural. He was
Supernatural.
Sam,
Oh,
yeah,
okay.
Yeah,
Yeah,
he's
yeah,
Sam and Dean's dad. Let's talk about Rorschach.
Oh yeah.
What do you think about Rorschach?
Well, I think he's kind of the epitome of like the noir character, like the Batman aspect of like the investigator.
He's
the
a
detective.
question.
The question. Perfect reference.
He really is like.
Yeah, he was based. That's what Alan Moore based his character off of.
Yeah.
Yeah. You know, and I think exactly like he's a brilliant detective who, you know, he has the ventriloquist mask, so he wants
The Rorschach test mask.
right, Rorschach test. There we go. And you know, and in that you're kind of, you know, in his wearing that, you're wondering, you know, what's your interpretation of him? You know, how do you see this guy? Is he good? Is he bad? You know, there's there's a lot of moral ambiguity when it comes to Rorschach. Is him killing people and slaughtering people the right thing? Is him only hunting down criminals bad? Or what about that scene when he's taking out the police? Is that the sign of a hero? You know, we don't know. That's the big question that he poses. I think that's really what's fascinating about this film, is that you can have a character like Rorschach who wants to do the right thing, who wants to see humanity thrive, and wants people to be, you know, people live life as transparently and as honestly as possible. But in that coming, you know, is that coming in the way of actual peace, actual, you know, that's the question that we're posed with at the end, and we don't get a clear answer to that. So, I mean, I don't know. I mean, he's a great character though. Homeboy who plays him, I forget his name.
Dude. Same.
Yeah, I know, and he's great in everything. The guy who plays him, he is great in every single performance he's in. But Jackie Earle Haley, yeah, great, and you know, he kind of brings that level of intensity that's necessary for a character like this, right? You know, like a lot of his actions are morally ambiguous, but to him is very black and white. You know, he's very one-sided of what he feels, and having a character who presents that duality, and even in that scene in the prison where he is literally, you know, barking at people, taking charge, cutting people's hands off.
The best line in the entire movie. It's like, I don't think you guys understand. I'm not locked in here with you. You're locked in here with me.
Yeah.
I was like, shit.
Yeah.
This guy's crazy. And I love it.
So it's interesting with a character like that, because you're asking a lot of questions about him. You're open to a lot of interpretations about him, but he believes in a very set, strict rule. So what are your thoughts on like Rorschach?
Yeah, man. See, Rorschach to me is like, he's technically, you could say he's the only good guy in this movie. Think about it. The entire movie is based on Dr. Manhattan and Ozymandias convincing everyone that he's the one who created all the atomic bombs that blew up all the major cities like New York, Beijing, and all these cities, Moscow. And Rorschach's the only one who says the truth is the only thing that the people need to hear. Never compromise, not even in the face of Armageddon. That's the big line he says at the end of the movie. And he's the only one. Technically, you could say by association, Night Owl, Silk Spectre, Dr. Manhattan are all evil. Because they went along with the plan of Ozymandias. Freaking Rorschach was the only one who said, screw you guys are going to have to kill me because I'm going to be good till the end. And I love that. That's why he's probably my favorite character. I love Ozymandias too. I think he's great. Yeah. But Ozymandias to me is just an embodiment of Lex Luthor. He's basically Lex. He's a weird combination of Lex and Batman.
Yeah, and Iron Man too.
And Iron Man. That's a good point. But Rorschach to me is the only good guy in the story. Technically, he really is. I mean, obviously, he kills people, but then again, you could make another argument for that. But to me, it's like that final scene where he blows up Rorschach and that Night Owl screaming and all that. That is so good. Yeah. It's so good because you realize that crap. This is a story where the bad guy won. Yeah. Is peace based on a lie still peace? You know? Right. I don't know. Is it if to kill millions to save billions is another line that Ozymandias has. Let's talk about Ozymandias because to me, I think that actor is great. Is Matthew Good? I think is his name.
Yeah, Matthew Good. Yeah.
I love Ozymandias. I think he's great because I feel like that's it's a villain we've seen so many times. Lex had the exact same plan. Ra's al Ghul had the exact same plan in Batman Begins. We've seen it before, but the fact that he executes it doesn't let anyone stop him. And the fact that he's the world's smartest man, and he kind of literally outsmarts a god. But with Dr. Manhattan.
Exactly.
Where Dr. Manhattan is like, you might as well be the smartest ant, or mite, I think he says termite.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, actually, I did outsmart you, because guess what? And he turns on the TV.
Yeah.
And he shows him that I was
secret
right.
Weapon.
Yeah, that's my secret weapon, that I was right, that this is really the way to do it. Don't place the blame on any of the countries. Place it on an outside source where all the rage and all the anger can be focused on that, which is Dr. Manhattan, which is a creature of power, a god basically. If the Americans and the Russians can focus on that, then there will be peace, because the world doesn't have a threat within the world. The world has a threat outside of the world, right?
Right.
So Ozymandias to me was like, shoot, this is a story where the bad guy kind of wins.
Yeah.
Does the end justify the means? This is all literally out of the Lex Luthor handbook, because Lex is my favorite villain, like, ever. It's Lex and Magneto are my two favorite villains. So seeing this, I was like, oh, that's Lex. That's literally what Lex has been saying for years. But Superman's like, no, you can't do that, because that's still killing people. What do you say?
Right. No, I mean, there's a point to his argument. I mean, this is a character who is a man who has a terrible, like, God complex.
He
like,
does, which is what Lex has, too.
Right.
But yeah, go ahead.
No, and then he even dresses himself, and at least in the comic book, he dresses himself in the Egyptian garb to kind of represent, like, his, kind of what he's inspired by. Of course, in the movie, they do the whole parody of the Batman and Robin bat nipples.
Oh yeah, they do.
So,
but he does have the little.
But he has the Egyptian stuff,
lines.
yeah, and he does that, and so I think that's really, again, I think that's what he wants to make the decision that he believes mankind cannot make. So in destroying New York and, like, all these different cities, of course it's going to unite people, because they have one common enemy, which would be Dr. Manhattan, who is a figure that they kind of even say in the movie is God on Earth to a lot of people, because the way he's able to change matter and do all this stuff. He's basically, yeah,
he's a god.
He's a god,
sure.
yeah. So, and, like, with that, when he, so having somebody who, the people at the same time admire and fear. So when that fear is escalated to the point of, oh, you could justify it by saying that Dr. Manhattan just had, like, a temper tantrum and just, like, destroyed half of the world.
And then he can just teleport to another galaxy, and it's like, boom, it's done.
Yeah.
He doesn't have to worry about his own safety or whatever.
Right, exactly. So then when something like that happens, of course, the world is going to unite. And of course, Ozymandias turns out to be right. That's what happens. And, does the end justify the means? I say no. That's kind of
I agree.
Yeah, I mean, that's very...
Good guy to the end.
right. It's very much of it,
Team Rorschach.
Yeah. I mean, it's a bad guy.
He's still killing a lot of people. That's a lot of dead people, man. That's a lot of dead people. I'm good. I don't need to have that on my hands. But yeah, I think that's handled so well throughout the movie, for sure. And obviously he compares himself to Ramesses II, which is also based on that poem, which we see in a bunch of other movies, but I freaking adore, which is look upon my works, ye mighty, and despair.
Oh, right.
For I am Ozymandias, King of Kings.
Yeah.
But basically that's kind of what he embodies in that whole movie. Before we move on, let's talk about the political atmosphere in this movie, because obviously this movie is extremely political.
Yeah.
What do you feel like this movie is trying to say politically? Especially let's tie this into the opening credits as well.
Oh, yeah.
Those opening credits with Bob Dylan,
right.
The Times Are Changing.
Yeah.
That has a lot to say in just an opening credit scene. Again, credit to Zack Snyder.
One
of the best opening credits ever, right?
Yeah.
And that's Zack Snyder. What do you think of those opening credits, and what do you think about? Because to me, that opening credits is those 4 minutes are as politically charged as the entire film.
Yeah, and I think that's what was so efficient about it. He kind of took the first half of, or at least the good half of Watchmen, and condensed it into that 4 minute sequence, and you get those. It reflects a lot of iconic moments that we see in normal, like, U.S. history and photography.
Yes, I mean, obviously JFK. That one's a little gnarly. Right. I can't lie. That was a tiny bit offensive. I'm not gonna say too soon, but But it still was like seeing the comedian kill JFK. I was like,
Right.
oh.
Well, that's what it's saying. I mean, you're kind of talking about it being Nixon's, the comedian being kind of Nixon's bulldog, like
Yeah.
his, that. I mean, that really is, and again, it's coming from a very, like you said, political place.
Yeah.
The movement towards liberation.
The hippie movement is in there.
Yeah,
the two
women
lesbian
kissing,
girls
yeah.
being murdered brutally.
Yeah. But even the whole like the whole iconic photo of after the war is over.
Yeah.
And instead of it being the soldier, it's one of the Watchmen
One of the women.
chicks.
Yeah.
So again, I think that's what's really if we. Again, that's kind of the twist on society that we kind of see. If there were superheroes, this is kind of how that would be acting.
And one of the ones I like too is like if there were superheroes, they'd probably be locked up in an insane asylum because they're crazy for dressing up as superheroes and trying to beat up people as vigilantes. And we see that in the opening credit too, with the guy being pulled away and he's like biting one of the insane asylum guys, and he's like biting his ear and shit, and he's like being pulled into the insane bus. I don't know what you call it, but you know, the typical white kind of ambulance looking bus, and they're all orderlies in this asylum. But that's essentially what would happen in real life, right? They would be taken to insane asylums and stuff because they're kind of crazy.
And they established a history of the old Watchmen and how they kind of conducted business, and how the new generation of Watchmen is a different team. But you could kind of see like the older generation reflected more of a more traditional sense of a superhero team in that opening credits, right? They are just a set of people who are trying to do the right thing, essentially. But as the new generation starts to come in, there's a lot more distrust and a lot more moral ambiguity when it comes to that.
Like the times are changing.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
I do want to mention one thing about Watchmen, though, and I think this is a criticism that a lot of people have about this movie in terms of adapting the source material, is this focus on violence, right? The violence in this movie.
I was going to bring that up, but you brought it up for me.
I mean, I think I think that's kind of what hinders the movie for me a little bit.
I 100% agree.
And I think that's really where a lot of people claim that Snyder misinterpreted the material. I would also say that as well. Like, a lot of what Watchmen was nonviolence. It was a nonviolent comic book. It was about how our sensationalization of violence in superhero comics and of superhero media in general is what is leading us to a desensitization of real life violence and of what an actual consequences would be in the sake of violence, especially in the ending. So.
Absolutely, 100% agree with you, because I do feel like that is the one thing that really took me out of the movie. Besides we won't talk about the giant spaceship sex scene. That also took me out of the movie.
Oh, man, I love it.
That took me out of the movie way out. It's like, what is going on? This is 8 minutes of hallelujah.
When the fire...
I hated that. I was like, this is so ridiculous. But I also thought that the violence was ridiculous.
Yeah.
So over the top, so overt, so in your face, so offensive. Obviously, sure, he wanted to be offensive, but I feel like it didn't work. Like when we're meeting Dr. Manhattan and he's going to the TV interview, we have a fight scene with Night Owl and Silk Spectre.
Yeah.
They're just straight up murdering people, like breaking their bones and like shooting, like they're getting shot at, and they're like their throats are being ripped. And I'm like, what's the point of this? I don't to show they're good fighters. You can show that in a different way. But I just didn't like that. I didn't like the scene of like, you're like, your hands are tied to the handlebars. Guess we're going to do a gore fest. Yeah. And I was like, is this a gore fest now? Like, that really took me out of the movie. I 100% agree with you that is what hinders the movie overall for me.
There's no restraint. And
I feel like, what is that? What would you say that is? Is that Zack Snyder trying to appeal to his like violent loving fans?
I think that's exactly what I think. Zack Snyder.
They know me for 300 in violence. Maybe I should make this a little more violent.
Well, I think just in general, I think with Snyder, his assumption is that audiences want to go to the movies to see violence, wants to go to the movies to see action, and that's where this stands out. Like, there are scenes in this movie, like the whole prison escape sequence where Silk Spectre and Night Owl break Rorschach out. In the book, that's only like a 1-page scene, and the movie is 5 minutes long of nonstop punching people and kicking people, and so I think that's where the problem lies. Is like the original graphic novel was all about preaching nonviolence, preaching how violence, the end goal of violence is, ultimately what unites us. But
Sure.
in hiding the violence throughout the book, you don't see all of like the graphic explosions. You don't see like they do take scenes out of the book where like Manhattan like explodes people, or was that the sequence when he exploded that one dude and then like his blood went like flowing everywhere in that room or whatever. Yeah, like it wasn't like that in the graphic novel. And I think if you cut a lot of that stuff out, it'll make the movie so much better.
So much better.
So much cleaner.
Yeah.
More concise. Because, again, like you said, the whole thing where they're leaving the restaurant and have to, beat the dudes up. I could see it if you do that, but without the slow motion, without all the bloody violence.
Yes.
It makes a lot more sense. And
it makes a lot more sense. It feels like, I'm not saying I'm cool. I love violence. Like we love Tarantino. Tarantino is one of the most like violence is cool. I'm cool with it. That's not what I'm saying. That's not what we're saying. What we're saying is that there's a tone that the movie's going in, and you feel it, and you're in it. You're in the tone of the movie, and then all of a sudden there's like a head explodes and an eyeball pops out at you, and you're taken out of it with the over the top violence because it feels cartoonish almost.
Yeah.
It feels like Looney Tunes cartoon with like, look, there goes his brain, and his brain plops out. And I'm like, well, what was the point of that? It takes you out of the movie.
Well, I do think that to some extent they are making fun of it, where they have like those little like old Batman sound effects when they hit and kick people. But to another extent, they're taking it so seriously that it's like
it's the tone mesh. It meshes, and it doesn't really mesh with the tone.
I think if they would have saved all of the violence for the end scene with Rorschach and with the whole explosion of New York, it would have been a lot more powerful, would have hit a lot harder, and it really would have encompassed a lot of what that book was going for. And I think that's kind of the problem with Zack Snyder, is that he is so trying to appeal to like a mass audience that a lot of what the meaning that is trying to be conveyed doesn't come through all the way. So
100% agree. I can't believe we agree on that, because I was watching it and I was thinking the exact same thing you were thinking. I was like, what was the point of making it that violent? Well, like, it didn't make sense to me as far as like what he was saying throughout the movie and what the violence was saying. Like, it just felt odd to me. I don't know. It really took me out. Any final words on Watchmen before we move on?
No, I just think this is actually one of the best superhero movies ever made.
Sure.
I think this is Zack Snyder's magnum opus. This is the best he's ever
You think this is the best movie he made?
Yeah, and the violence, if they toned down the violence, this would have been a perfect movie.
Yeah.
Especially adapting that graphic novel, which is something that has been considered unadaptable for many, many years. And I think he did a really good job at it. But unfortunately, it gets weighed down by, and I don't know if that was him. I don't know if that was the studio saying we need to put more action in here.
Sure.
Maybe they need to justify their R rating a little bit. But to me, if you watch something like The Dark Knight or something where there's barely any blood, and it still works just as good with the action scene. So
for me, it wasn't the blood as much as the oddness of the blood. Like, it didn't come like, it wasn't just like. It was like a jawbone breaks and the blood splatters in the camera and it splatters on a girl, and I'm like, why? Like that's the thing that really got me. But I agree with you. Another thing to me for this movie is obviously we talked about the opening credits, but the visuals are incredible.
Gorgeous.
Another credit to Snyder and Larry Fong. Let's move on to Zack Snyder's real greatest movie ever, The Legend of the Owls. I'm kidding. It's not called The Legend of the Owls.
Yeah, I don't know what it's called. I actually remember seeing this movie. It came out the same. I don't know if it came out the same weekend, but it came out around the same time that The Social Network came out. So I remember
The Legend
watching
of the Guardians, The Owls of Galul.
Owls of the whatever. I don't care. Yeah. This is a dumb movie. I remember like I said, I watched this the same weekend The Social Network came out.
Sure.
There's like the double header of that. And I just remember not liking this movie, man.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know.
I think it's all right. I think
it's decent.
It's
but
fine.
Yeah.
It works fine. It just.
Gorgeous movie.
Yeah. I mean, that's,
gorgeous.
Again, Snyder. It just didn't feel like it fitted in Zack Snyder's film book.
Yeah. Even when people talk about Zack Snyder movies now, it's often left out. But I do think it does get props for the animation style that they were going for. Something completely unseen. I think it should have gotten an Oscar nomination, honestly, for some like visual effects or some sort of technical category, because it is stunning. And I know they brought in like Roger Deakins to help out with the lighting and the actual look of how to make an animated film look.
Sure.
look realistic, and it did that really well. But to me, the story is just kind of,
Yeah.
it's based on a book, popular kids book.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if it's like the same name or whatever, but they were hoping for some real franchise potential here.
That's a bummer. In that case, let's move on to Man of Steel.
Well, we have Sucker Punch, right? Sucker Punch.
Oh my gosh, Sucker Punch.
Let's skip that one.
Let's touch on Sucker Punch. Sucker Punch. Vanessa Hudgens.
Yeah.
Oscar Isaac.
Yeah. Emily Browning.
Pre Oscar Isaac hype.
Yeah.
This is Oscar Isaac when he's just a little Mexican dude.
Right.
And no one really knows who he is.
Right.
Yeah. What do you think about the greatest movie ever called Sucker Punch?
Yeah, this is one of the worst movies I've ever seen, man. I can't give this movie.
It's just a weird movie. It just feels like it doesn't. The dialogue is pretty rough in this movie. I feel like the dialogue
Everything's
takes me out.
rough.
I know,
I remember watching.
The editing's pretty rough too.
I tried to go back and rewatch all of Snyder's films.
I did,
and
this was one that I saw half of it.
I couldn't get through 10 minutes, man. I couldn't get through 10 minutes. I couldn't believe what I was watching.
Yeah.
That whole opening thing with her trying to shoot the dude, but he shoots the light bulb and it kills his sister. Oh, I don't know. I was like, what is this? This is 4 minutes. This is a 1 minute scene slowed down to like 1/4 speed. Just to, I don't know, man. I can get it. I can get into it.
This is what a lot of people say when they say that Zack Snyder isn't as good as you might think he is. They point to Sucker Punch. They're like, what about Sucker Punch? And it's like, well, I don't know. That was he was sleeping, man. He was drunk.
Well, that's kind of the definition of style over substance too, right? Because you literally don't have any idea what's happening in the story.
But you see the trailers for that, and you're like, dang, that's an anime come to life. I'm down.
And they have some really cool ideas for action scenes, the whole mecha, like the robot.
That's
war
so
stuff.
animated. Yeah, like I can't tell you how anime that is. That is the most like anime with like a supercharged girl. Like that's so freaking anime.
Yeah, but the execution of it just didn't work for me, especially being so dull and like so. They kind of talked about monochromatic. That movie's damn near black and white.
What do you think about the performances in this movie?
Performances. Air quotes. Podcast.
Hey,
listeners.
Oscar Isaac is a treasure. That man is a little Mexican treasure.
Yeah, it's not a good movie. It's not a good movie. This is only original movie too, which is
that's a bummer. That doesn't showcase well. In that case, let's move on to what we're all here for, Man of Steel.
Yeah.
I'm wearing my Superman shirt. Superman. I'm gonna go personal on you. Is one of my all-time favorite characters. You know this because I've talked about it on Schmells quite a bit.
Right.
I love Superman so much. Like Batman, Superman, and Spider-Man are the three comic book characters that have always been like the closest to like me and my family. So obviously the hype RB3, it might still be one of the best trailers I've ever seen. The Man of Steel trailer, one of the greatest trailers I've ever seen in my life.
The Hans Zimmer.
The Hans Zimmer score is freaking flawless. This movie had all the hype following the Dark Knight Rises, following the Dark Knight saga, the trilogy, the thing that made it. Produced by Christopher Nolan, directed by Zack Snyder. This thing was supposed to be the greatest movie of all time. Did it do that for you?
No, I didn't do it.
Okay. It didn't do it for anyone. But I'm probably going to be the one who defends Man of Steel the most. I don't know how you feel about it, but personally, I feel like this movie gets way too much crap. Way too much crap. Like, unnecessary crap. I feel like there is a lot that doesn't work in this movie, but I feel like there's more that does work in this movie. Starting with, first and foremost, Henry Cavill as Clark Kent / Superman. I think he's great. I think he fits the role perfectly. I think the only reason why this movie doesn't fall apart is because of him. Because it's one of those things where I remember watching this movie for the first time with my mom and like renting the movie. And it's always fun kind of showing a movie to my mom, but because my mom has a very different perspective. She doesn't have the usual fanboy perspective or like, I grew up with these characters perspective, because she doesn't. She didn't grow up with it. She doesn't care. And my favorite thing my mom said after the movie was, okay, so Superman talked like twice in this movie? And it's like, I was like, yo, mic drop. Because it's true. He doesn't really have a lot to say in this movie. He's mainly just reacting to scenarios that kind of come up to him. But you don't really dive into the character. He finds out who he is. He freaks out, and then Zod's trying to blow up the planet, and the rest is like an hour and a half of action scenes, which is cool. But it could have been so much more. At least I feel. But to be fair, I put this movie above pretty much every DCU new movie, to be honest. I put it above BVS. I put it above Suicide Squad.
Above Wonder Woman?
I put it probably above Wonder Woman, yeah. Yeah, sorry, Wonder Woman. I probably put this above Wonder Woman, yeah. Because to me, there is so much that works with this movie. The Smallville stuff works for me. The Clark Kent stuff works for me. Him being Superman, the Krypton stuff is great. There's so much that works in this movie. Henry Cavill, again, I can't talk enough about how much I like this version of Superman as far as Henry Cavill. And a lot of people were saying, that's not Superman. Superman's not supposed to be dark and gritty and color contrasted, and he's supposed to be light and fun and cracking jokes. And I'm like, is it? Or is that just Christopher Reeves that you're thinking of? Because a lot of people mistake Christopher Reeves as the definite Superman, and that could be your Superman. But to me, it's like saying that that's Superman is like such a small-minded point of view. And I'm not saying that the Zack Snyder Superman is the incumbent Superman. I've always said, and I've talked to you about Superman quite a bit. Yeah. All-Star Superman, that's my Superman. That's Superman. That. Just if you want to see a Superman, that's Superman right there. And there's so many great Superman movies, animated movies. Superman versus the Elite. All-Star Superman, Superman, Batman, Public Enemies is another good one. There's Superman Apocalypse, Superman and Batman Apocalypse. To me, Superman can be so much more. Superman the Animated Series, holy crap. Yeah. Freaking his performance in Justice League, like the way they show Superman in Justice League, that's Superman. And maybe he doesn't really hit it on the nose in this movie, but I feel like he gets close enough. And I feel like people are so concerned about why wasn't there any jokes in the movie and why wasn't there blah blah blah. It should have been way lighter and the color threw me off. I'm fine with the color. Who cares? I personally didn't care, and I didn't think it was as dark as people say it was. I think Zod was dark. I think the situation he is was dark, but I didn't think Henry Cavill's Superman was dark. I didn't feel that at all. I just felt like he was reacting to the situation he was placed in. I don't know. I'm going on a rant right now. I want to hear your thoughts.
No, I mean, I agree to some extent. I mean, I think this movie's okay.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't, love it. I don't hate it. I think there's some things it does really well. I think as a movie that's like, oh, here's what happens on Superman's first day of the job. I think that's really interesting. I think that's
which is pretty much what this is.
Yeah, and I think that's where it succeeds. Of course he's going to make mistakes. Of course he's going to accidentally tear down 1,100 buildings, but
dude, I gotta say this. I'm sorry to interrupt you, but as a DBZ fan, I'm a huge. This is the Dragon Ball Z movie. This is a Dragon Ball Z. As soon as I watched this movie,
I remember watching it in theaters.
I remember watching it in theaters.
Yes.
And there's a scene in Smallville where Superman is fighting Feora and this big Kryptonian, and it's literally Nappa and Vegeta, and I'm like, holy shit, that's Vegeta because he's little, and that's Nappa because he's big, and he's fighting him in this super powered way. And I was like, this is a Dragon Ball Z movie.
Yes.
This is literally a Dragon Ball Z movie. But as a Dragon Ball Z movie, I have to critique it because guess what? As someone who's a Dragon Ball Z fan, Goku always tells the person he's fighting, let's go where there's no people. And he flies away to like an abandoned island. Goku always does that because he knows that if I fight someone, shit's about to blow up.
Yeah.
And I can't be anywhere near a city or people. So Goku, every time he fights someone in Dragon Ball Z, he always flies away to some other planet or something. Or, I mean, not another planet, but like another place where it's abandoned.
Right.
Superman, all he had to do was be like, yo, Zod, you want to fight? Let's take it outside, bro. Yeah. But let's not fight in here.
Yeah.
Because the whole time I was thinking, man, he's really... Ooh, Superman. Ooh, come on, man. That building. Oh, there goes 12,000 people.
Yeah.
Watching that.
There's a lot of moments in that movie where kind of watching it again and again and again, I'm like, Superman could have made a really better choice here.
Yeah, he really could.
For me in particular, it comes down to where he's fighting, what was it, like the Earth Destroyer, right? The Earth.
Yeah, I forgot what it's called.
Yeah, but he's like fighting the hands of it. And in my mind, I kind of thought, well, wouldn't it be better if Superman went down and kind of caught all the jets that are flying in the buildings and stopping a little and like helping people through the wreckage, like get out instead of fighting this thing. That's kind of what will make more sense to me. I think that's more of what would fall in line with like a Superman movie. But I mean, that being said, again, to me, it's like, yes, his first day on the job. Like he literally has to be thrown into the Superman position and not having any idea of what that really means. And I think that's kind of like the foundational problem of this movie is there's no definition of the meaning of life. Where as in the original 1978 Superman, it comes down to the foundation. Like with Paul Kent dying in the original film, he dies from a heart attack. And, you know, in that you kind of learn
he couldn't have stopped
it.
With all his powers.
Yes, exactly. And, you know, and that's a lesson he has to learn. Whereas in this movie, Paul Kent dies.
Could have stopped it
in a tornado
easily.
Yes,
like I'm talking easily.
Yeah,
he literally could have been like, "Well, all these people are gonna see me." And they're like, "No, they're not. Yeah. You can just make a tornado yourself. You can just fly into the tornado and just be like, it was the tornado. You could go super speed and get." That really did get me real mad. Like that scene with Pa Kent. The fact that he died like that, it's not the fact that he died, it's the way he died. That's
right.
I'm with you. I really like him dying of natural conditions because that's way more realistic. That feels like no matter how powerful Superman is, he couldn't have stopped that. That's straight out of Smallville too, like the TV show. Like the fact that Pa Kent dies like that too. And because it's like, and he says it in the show, he says like, you know, no matter what you couldn't have done it. No matter what you try, you couldn't have saved your dad.
Right. Yeah. And I think that's what's important. I think that's what's missing in Man of Steel. So that's why when he is fighting Zod, he doesn't really have a concern of how to save all these people. Yeah, because he's never really been exposed to that. And I think, you know, and of course that comes down, again, further down to the idea of Paul Kent telling a young Superman not to save people. Of course, to stay quiet, but there's an extra level of moral ambiguity. And I think that's another consistent theme in Zack Snyder's movies of like, is it really a good idea to save people when you could be outing yourself, exposing yourself? Is putting yourself out in the world really the best idea? That's the question of Watchmen, of whether or not the government should be censoring these superheroes, or the question in, you know, even in Sucker Punch, which is not a good movie, but the whole idea of that is if you lock these girls away and, you know, take away their potential, they're not going to, you know, demonstrate that.
Sure.
So, but they have to overcome that themselves, and that's what Superman's arc is trying to overcome his own insecurities to become the hero that he's supposed to be. And I think that that's kind of where the establishment of the movie leads into a lot of the big problems that a lot of people have with it. But going off of the movie that we have, I think it was done really well. You know, I think where the emotional arc that they're going for is conveyed to the extent it's not the emotional arc that I wanted or I think fits well in the Superman movie. But I think that's what they were going for, and I think they did that well.
Sure.
Even down to having the decision to have to kill Zod. You know, so I think to me that's where the importance of that movie lies, is that it might have not been necessarily the quote-unquote best Superman movie, but it was on its own the story that I was trying to tell. This post 9/11, this post-terrorism movement, the fear of aliens and the fears of not ours, the others, is conveyed really well in this. So I think that's what they're going for.
Yeah, and again, to me, that relies a lot on Henry Cavill's Superman. I feel like his Superman does work, but I feel like it would have been way better if we could dive into his character. I feel like he just doesn't get enough to do. He doesn't get enough to say, enough to evolve.
We're not clear of his motivations.
Yeah.
We're not clear of his goals.
Absolutely. That's the thing that gets me, because I feel like if we did that, this movie would have been great. It would have worked perfectly. Yeah. But the fact that we don't get that, it just disconnects with a lot of audiences. But I do prefer it over Batman versus Superman, which let's get to this movie. Because this movie, I rewatched this one again as well, falls apart for me quite a bit. A bit. But to be honest, RB3, the reason why this movie falls apart for me, besides one ginormous thing that I've talked about for years, is, besides that, I'll get to that. But let's get to the reason why I think the movie falls apart in general. Batfleck.
Oh, you don't like Batfleck?
I don't like Batfleck. I think Batfleck doesn't work. I think his motivation in this movie doesn't make sense. I think the way they portray it doesn't make sense. I think the way Batman nonchalantly kills people doesn't make sense. I think nothing to me for Batman's characterization, and I know everyone's so in love with him, but I just didn't. I felt like he was more of a dick. Not even a villain, just a dick. Like a douchebag. He's like, I'm gonna kill Superman. I'm gonna show him my dick's bigger, bro. And I'm like, that's not Batman. That's never been Batman. And he's like, well, yeah, I'm gonna show him because, you know, he killed all those people. And I'm like, who is this? This isn't. And he's working out to get ready to fight Superman. And I'm like, I don't know. I didn't care for it at all. To me, everything that does work is Superman.
See, I'm almost the exact opposite.
That's incredible to me.
Yeah.
I want to hear your thoughts because that to me is baffling.
Yeah. So for me,
besides the fact that we're not even going to talk about, well, we probably will, but the worst casting decision in the history of anything I've ever seen is Jesse Eisenberg's Lex Luthor. He's literally playing Jim Carrey's the Riddler. He's playing Jim Carrey's the Riddler in this movie as a Lex Luthor. Yeah. It is the worst. It sucks you out of the movie. It black holes you out of the movie. Like a black hole sucking you and breaking you down into tiny little particles. That's what Jesse Eisenberg's Lex Luthor does in this movie. It is so bad. Oh my! Oh, two people getting together. Oh, I love bringing people together. Oh my! He's not a bad because intelligence isn't right. I'm like, what are you doing, dude? He's playing like a weird version of a Jim Carrey. I hated it so much, and I just told you how much I love Lex, and we saw Lex in Watchmen.
Yeah,
that's Lex Luthor. That's who Lex is. That's the Lex that I've grown up with.
Yeah,
what we saw in BVS was not Lex Luthor.
Right.
I'll let you get to Batfleck.
Right. No, I mean to me, I think you're kind of right. I think it is a departure from what we see as our conventional Batman.
Sure.
But I think it's the adaptation of the Frank Miller Batman, right? And Frank Miller is.
But every time someone brings up the Frank Miller man, I'm telling you that Superman isn't Superman.
Well,
Frank Miller
that's my
and that
problem.
Superman
yeah.
that Superman in the Frank Miller novel is a villain. He's like a little puppy, lapdog puppy of Nixon, and he's like a little.
Yeah.
He's just that's not Superman.
Well, that's where I'm going to talk about that too, like kind of why this movie doesn't work.
Sure.
And that's a big part of it. But I'll get to that in a little bit. But to me, they were adapting that. They're adopting that Batman, though. The idea of this, and, you know, when you follow Frank Miller, a lot of his ideology kind of comes down to, like, the individualist, like the idea of somebody who is so gun-ho on his own self-righteousness.
And morals.
Yeah, and morals that is going to either destroy them or make them great. And that's the character we see in 300. That's the character we see in all of Frank Miller's writing, frankly. And that's especially the character we see in The Dark Knight Returns, which is what they're basing it off of. The older Batman, the kind of out of retirement, the lost Robin, all these different aspects and factors that go into it. But long story short, I think that's where the film kind of gets his footing, is from this Frank Miller kind of Ayn Randian, like super machismo Batman going up against somebody like Superman, who has to, coming off of something like Man of Steel, where like he's being condemned by the government. He's basically like on the run the whole time. But he does have, but when he comes in to answer for his
potential crime,
for his potential crimes, we see that whole so we never get a cathartic, and I think that's the overarching problem in this movie. It's filled with a lot of big moments, a lot of big set pieces, a lot of big scenes, but ultimately it's like we never get a sense of actual resolution to any of that. When Superman has to talk to Congress, do we really get an answer to his moral position on that? No, the place explodes. When something like he goes to save Lois Lane and he saves Lois, he obviously splashes that one dude through a bunch of walls, and whatnot. So it's like there's not, and that's the end of that scene. And then we come back to that scene much later, and we realize that, all of those dudes died. They just got killed. So it's like, whoa, wait a minute.
But he didn't kill them.
Yeah, he didn't kill them.
Yeah.
Like the fact that he let that happen, or the fact that we don't even know what happens, is like, yo, what the, like, can't, like, we have to finish, we have to get some sort of, so that's kind of, and again, when adapting the Frank Miller novel, that's where the real conflict, you see why that conflict makes sense. Why Batman wants to fight Superman. Superman is...
In this movie, it doesn't make sense.
It doesn't, because you don't...
It makes zero sense. And it frustrates me so bad that people are like, it totally makes sense. Superman destroyed all the... No, he didn't. He really didn't. I mean, that to me is so baffling that one of my least favorite lines in the movie, he's like, we gotta kill them because if there's a 1% chance he's evil, then we gotta murder this guy. And I'm like, no, that makes no sense.
Well, see, and that's where the political divide in this movie comes in, right? Because and this comes from adapting The Dark Knight Returns as well. The idea of that Batman is that he's self-righteous, he's on his own, he wants to be an individual. He is kind of, and again, this is going to offend a lot of people. I don't want to offend anybody. This is what I read into the film. This Batman is kind of like the right-wing kind of center of the film.
Sure.
Right? His whole arc is that he wants to be on his own, no government, nobody watching after him. He wants to do his own thing. He's going to brand people. It doesn't matter if they get killed or not. He has his own agenda. Whereas what Superman in the comic book was supposed to represent is the government, the democracy. He is working for the government. He's fighting for the greater good, the collective, the people, and that is more of what and Frank Miller. I think even Frank Miller missed this himself. Is really the ideological conflict in that is right versus left, and that's where and
that's where the novel falls apart for me too. And I know everyone loves this Dark Knight Returns. It's great. It's a great Batman story. It's a terrible Superman story.
Yeah,
it's one of the. It's not. It's just. It's a caricature of Superman.
Yeah,
and that for me is why the idea of even adapting this in the first place. I just want to make this clear. I just named 2 Superman movies that are really, really freaking good, where he's co-starring with Batman. What people don't get is that Superman and Batman are the greatest duo and superhero connection ever. I'm talking ever. Watch Superman and Batman Public Enemies. Watch Superman and Batman Apocalypse. These are 2 characters that do butt heads, but always find a center ground. Whereas like this made no sense to me, where all Batman needed to do was have a 2-minute conversation with the guy to be like, oh, your mom's in trouble? Oh, crap, why didn't you tell me? Dude, I've been trying to tell you for the last 20 minutes, but you started beating my face with kryptonite. Yeah. He's like, yeah, but you could have told me that your mom's in trouble. It's like, really? Like, that's what it is? Like, that to me just took me out, because all it was a 2-second conversation where Lois Lane is like, no, his mom's in trouble. What? Why didn't he say anything? Well, because you were beating his face in. Yeah. Like, that to me was just like...
Well, see, and I think that is why...
That's why to me Batman is like such a dick in this movie. I'm like, dude, die. Seriously, you're not Batman. You suck.
Well, I think see that's where the Frank Miller influence comes in, right?
Yeah.
If Batman is this hard on like this man, this machismo, this individual who stands by nobody's ground, who does this, of course he's going to have an ideological conflict with somebody who's more for the people, more for saving the world, more for humanity, more for the government. In the book, that makes sense. And and of course, somebody who's so hot-headed, and the book was kind of rated in a divisive time, but I think this movie could have really played on that, the sort of ideological division that's happening in the country right now. This movie could have played on that, but instead they have to go with the stupid, oh, his mom's being kidnapped, this and that. You're right. That could have been sorted out in 2 minutes.
It could have been sorted out in 2 seconds. Hey, Bruce. My mom.
Yeah.
Her name's Martha. She's being taken by Lex right now. I want to let you know right now that he's pinning us against each other. But in real life, like, my mom's about to be killed. You mind helping me out? Oh, dude, yeah, for sure.
Whereas the ideological differences alone could have prompted a decent fight if they would have explored that further. But instead, they have to set up for the franchises. They have to set up for the the next movies and all of this. And we can't really have Batman and Superman be mad at each other. The idea of unity is so far out for these producers or whoever wrote the script or even maybe even Schneider. Like the idea of unifying these two warring ideologies is so far out that they couldn't even think. Like to me, that would make it a decent ending.
Sure.
If they had this big great ideological difference and how that comes to divide them and how that comes to make that fight. But if they were to stand together in unity and not to fight some goddamn, bone, like
Doomsday,
the Doomsday,
Kryptonian.
not to do that, but to actually have an understanding, to reason with each other. I think that would have been a lot more, But again, this is a superhero movie. This is something that they got to sell to audiences. And the fact of the matter is, I guess you can't really have Batman and Superman fight because they have different ideas of saving the world. They have to fight because their mother, one's mother is in trouble. So
yeah, but that to me even didn't. I know a lot of people always joke about Martha. That to me didn't even. To me, I was like, that's fine. That makes sense to me as far as like.
I can't excuse that, man.
No, I'm not excusing it. I'm not excusing. The way it was done was poorly done. I agree with that. But the reasoning behind it, I get what they were going for. I get it's the whole idea of like, hey, I have a mom too. She's in trouble. The whole thing of like playing into the mother concept, the idea of someone in trouble, the idea of being related to humanity by the one thing that connected you to your own humanity, right? I get it. I just didn't like how it was done. One. Two, I didn't like how that whole entire Martha thing could have been done 20 minutes before they even got into a fight.
Yeah. Well, I mean, again, I think that's where the movie like messes up. If they would have had the ideological war instead of having the mother there, that would have made it a lot better. And plus, the whole idea of Superman is that he is at least our traditional sense of Superman is that he is a man trying to grapple with he is a alien trying to grapple with the world.
With humanity.
Right?
Yeah.
But in this movie, it's so much about him being only about Lois and only about his mother that, frankly, really not even about his mother. When his mother gets kidnapped, he hasn't even noticed, right? So it's like, it's so much about being his relationship with Lois that, and even Martha Kent had that whole conversation with him. Is like, you can either be the hero for the people or just be the hero for you. And that is where I think the movie, kind of falls apart and sleeps on itself, because if it's Superman, it should be about the humanity. Batman is about himself. That's what Batman is.
Sure.
Superman should be about the people. And, of course, that's going to be a continuing arc from the first Man of Steel where he has that question up front. But if his whole MO in this movie was about, I'm not fucking bored, saving people, I'm not like hauling ships looking, depressed, if they would have locked that down, and again, they could have locked that down in Man of Steel with having, with him having a better understanding of humanity through his relationship with Paul Kent, and that could have been further emphasized in this movie, but it just switches to the other direction where he is where Paul Kent has another scene with him where he's like, oh yeah, I saved myself in my town, in my farm, but the stream went to another village and ended up flooding a whole bunch of other people. But it's okay because I met your mother. What? What? Is that what you're teaching Superman?
I don't think that's what he says.
That's damn near the quote.
He says that the nightmares stopped when I met your mother because she taught me about humanity. So
why are you teaching Superman this? Why are you telling the most powerful figure on the planet, like, what are you doing? So that's why when he sacrifices himself at the end, is he just sacrificing himself for Lois? That doesn't make sense. He's
sacrificing himself for both RB3, Lois and humanity at the same time. He says, I need to save the world. And she says, don't do it. And he says, you are my world. Get it? It's both at the same time.
Pick a side. This is what I'm saying. Like, people, you have to, when it comes to having a movie that's so focused on an ideological difference, a character has to pick a side. You have to pick a side, and there's no side for Superman. We get the side for Batman, but even his side doesn't make a lot of sense. So
I don't know, man. To me, I feel like at least Superman was trying. I feel like Batman was just a dick. It just didn't work for me. And also, I feel like Superman just gets so much shade from the writers and from the producers. And then
well, they
don't know what to do with him.
They're
just like, let's have Superman go over here and do this, and then Batman get really mad at him, and then have a Batman workout scene. And I'm like, what? No. Instead of that Batman workout scene, have another scene with Superman when we get to know more about him. And I don't know.
And I think that's also, I think Nerdwriter, I keep referencing Nerdwriter because I'm just a big fan of that guy, but he has a great video on how in Batman v Superman, you never get an established moment with Superman.
You never do. It's very true.
Like, I think there's, we visit like the Daily Planet 8 times, and the longest scene that's there is like 1 minute and 30 seconds.
Yeah.
Like that's the problem,
It is a huge problem.
Spend time developing Superman
before you show us Batman and jerk off to Batman.
Yeah.
But speaking of that,
no offense to Snyder, by the way. I think what at least I will commend Batman v Superman for trying to be different and trying to be his own thing and trying to do something new with the genre and deconstruct his heroes. But
to be honest, I feel like I just don't like Ben Affleck. I mean, I like Ben Affleck, but I feel like Ben Affleck really pulled his own weight in this movie. And if you guys don't think he's the kind of guy to do that, trust me, he is. He is definitely the kind of guy to be like, I want this in the movie. I want to do this. I gotta have this too. And he's like totally the kind of guy to do that. Also, real quick, before we close up shop, we're still good?
Yeah, we're
cool.
good. Yeah.
Doesn't make any sense if you're gonna have a super mech suit to work out with weights and do like a bunch of squats. That makes 0 sense. 0 sense. If you're inside an Iron Man suit that gives you super strength, why are you exhausting your muscles if you're going to be inside an actual mech suit that gives you that super strength? That is the dumbest thing I've ever heard, and I don't care what people say because that makes 0 sense.
It's a Zack Snyder movie. You have to have a training montage.
That makes
you have to have a training.
If you're gonna have a training montage, have him sprint, have him do some laps, but do weights as if he's okay.
You got to be the man, Ace.
But if he's working out with those weights, he's not gonna get any stronger because he's inside the same suit that gives him the same amount of strength. Either way, if I was inside the suit, I would still be. I don't know. I'm gonna stop. That didn't make any sense. I'm sorry. And the whole Ben Affleck body double didn't work for me either. Because that's not Ben Affleck. I don't care what anyone says. That was our episode. No, I'm kidding. Let's get some questions real quick before we close up shop. There was only a few Twitter questions.
By the way, people, we get the Martha scene, okay? I don't need to see a 12-paragraph essay about.
Oh, I get it. Trust me, I explained.
We all get it.
It makes sense. It just wasn't framed right.
There is a nice cut on YouTube where somebody did like the same scene but with the music from the Dark Knight trilogy from like the Hans Zimmer music.
Yeah,
that was nice.
Alrighty, let's say this. Dylan Langes says, "I think his films are gorgeous but often lack a story. I do love the weirdness of Sucker Punch though, even though it's not a great film." There's your Sucker Punch shout out, man.
Yeah. I don't know. Not a fan of Sucker Punch, so.
Kristen Smith says, "What do you guys?" Oh, shout out to Kristen, by the way. I met her at earlier this week. What do you both think about his progression as a director? Personally, I like his earlier stuff. As he makes more movies, I've been less and less happy with his work. I think she's mainly referring to Dawn of the Dead and maybe 300.
300, yeah, and probably Watchmen too, maybe. Yeah, but of course now he's become so embroiled in the DC cinematic or DC expanded universe that that's a lot of where his work is going now. So.
I mean, to be fair to him, him and his wife Deborah Snyder created the DC cinematic universe.
Right, and I think it's funny too, man. I think if Man of Steel would have really worked, I think it would have been all Chris Nolan's credit. Like, everybody would have been like, Chris Nolan's a genius. He did it again. But now that it doesn't work, everybody blames Snyder.
I 100% agree. Sam Delano says, visuals are probably Snyder's greatest strength in filmmaking. Besides that, what do you think are his other strengths?
Well, I think his whole approach to a hero, even though it doesn't necessarily work for Superman and I believe Batman versus Superman, but his whole approach of having to make a choice, having to, the plight of a hero, the sacrifice of a hero, and how that impacts a lot of the hero's journey and the hero's story. I think that's incredible. I think he does that really well. But however, when it comes to some of his films or some of his characters that are pre-established, it doesn't necessarily work. But again, I think that's his biggest strength, is his focus on the hero and how we could get into the hero and relate to him.
Final one, Danny Allen. Shout out to Danny Allen. Says, do you accept Zaddy as our Lord and Savior?
Oh no!
And it has a picture of that's Zack Snyder,
Nolan?
Zack Snyder Jesus with Spielberg and Nolan. Fincher is down there. Kevin Feige's down there.
Yeah, that's a good meme.
That is a good meme.
I haven't seen that meme.
Do you accept?
No, I don't.
All right, guys. With that was our episode on Zack Snyder. Make sure you guys comment, leave a comment, leave a question. What is your favorite Zack Snyder film? What do you think about his filmmaking? What do you think about his visuals? What do you think about the current DCEU? Do you think he gets too much credit? Do you think he doesn't get enough credit? Let us know in the comments down below. I'm sure the comments are going to be great in this video because I love you guys, and I feel like you guys are going to leave great comments. Anyways, I am Ace. This is RB3. And we are peacing out from the Meaning Of podcast. Peace out, guys. Zack Snyder for life.